There are 700 Great Books discussion groups nationwide with nearly 15,000 members. Next on Book TV, we'll take you to a meeting in Wilmington, Delaware for the Essential Quran, translated by Thomas Cleary. It's an introductory selection of readings from the Sacred Book of Islam. This program runs an hour and a half.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We are here this evening to discuss the Quran as translated and presented by Thomas Cleary, C-L-E-A-R-Y. During the first part of this discussion, I want us to stick with the usual rules of Great Books discussion. We shall focus on this book, the Essential Quran. We'll turn over the last 20 minutes or thereabouts to anybody who's read the entire Quran, and I know there are people in this group who have read it at least once. Some people have made a habit of it. So with that, and we may use the notes that Cleary has at the back of this book. They're basically footnotes, and we have never excluded footnotes. Everything understood? Despite all the books people have come in here with? Okay. What does the use of the word God by Cleary instead of the word Allah do to you as you read the book? Does it influence your view?
In my case, no.
Okay.
No, not at all.
I don't think so. In fact, I think perhaps it may make it a little bit more relevant, since Allah is a word that I'm familiar with, but it doesn't mean quite so much to me as God.
All right. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I can accept it. I think Allah is a truer meaning for this reading.
Is it mature?
It's a true meaning of, because this is supposed to be, is the word of God, of Allah.
Allah, okay.
The word of Allah.
All right. What kind of God or Allah does the Quran describe?
Well, I thought in my reading that Allah was very vengeful, and non-believers are the fuel of hell. And there are a lot of phrases like that. And that struck me as being different than God in the Bible, the Christian Bible.
On the other hand, Allah is all forgiving if you are willing to repent. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you're sorry for your sins. He says someplace in here that man is created weak, and Allah or God knows that he's going to fall occasionally.
And I found him described as the compassionate one, but in one place it says, protect us from the compassionate one. And I wondered why we would have to be protected from that.
Do you know where it says protect us from the compassionate one?
I'm looking for it.
Well, while Helen looks for that, let's go back to what Charles said a moment ago, that humanity was created weak. Anybody have a notion as to why? That's on page 32.
Well, the Quran recognizes the writings in the Bible, in the New and Second New Testament, in the Old Testament, and it's Genesis is quoted quite often in there, how Adam and Eve were created in the so-called Garden of Eden, and Satan and all that. So would think that Adam was susceptible to sin,
Is the question,
thus making him weak.
making him weak.
excuse me, what was the question? Why did God create?
Yeah, why did he make
Mankind
God,
weak.
he, she, it, make humanity weak?
Are we meant to be questioning God, who's all-knowing?
Hey, Jonquil, why are you here?
Here in this room?
Whatever. I have a wonderful cartoon with two guys, one sitting on one side of a corner and one sitting on the other side of it. One says, answers, $5. Answers to life's questions, $5. The other one says, questions to life's answers, $5. Does that answer it for you?
Well, I think that at somewhere we mustn't be arrogant, and that to think that we can know these things.
I'm asking you to think about it.
It seems to me that God created man with free will. And because he has free will, ultimately he comes to the conclusion that he is above sin.
That man is above sin.
Yes.
Does that make him weak?
Yes.
Why?
Because he will sin, and anybody who sins and offends God is automatically weak.
I didn't get that out of here.
Yeah, I
That's not in here.
in this, it seems to me that the only sin that I remember reading about in here was arrogance of not believing in God, but there was no talk of, or I shouldn't say no, but I mean, I didn't, overall, it seemed to me that the biggest or the most overriding message was that God is great, believe in God.
Yes.
And
yes.
and that error, and I don't remember the word sin in here as much as words like obsession and error and arrogance.
Arrogance. Yeah.
Was not believing in how great God was. Oh, see, to the answer to your first question that I didn't say, but the impression I had of God was just that he was just so, or God is so powerful.
But arrogance, I used the wrong word when I said sin. Arrogance is sin. And if you are sufficiently arrogant, you are equating yourself with God, or maybe even making yourself superior to God. And therefore, you must be weak because God is supreme.
And you become arrogant when you do not follow the tenets of the book, this book.
Yes.
That's when arrogance evolves.
Yes.
Now, there is, since I heard that we can use the notes that Cleary has, on page 179, there is a note to this particular verse. And it says, if I could read it, it says, as a mortal transient being, the human is constitutionally weak. As a subjective consciousness susceptible to emotional upset, conditioning, and dependency, the human is psychologically weak. The ways of life described in sacred law are means of managing these weaknesses more easily. And that is Cleary's note on this particular verse.
And your question was, why did God make man weak?
Yeah, I was just wondering what you all might think about that.
Of course, I might think that if I was going to be all-powerful and I was going to create these people, I certainly would think about making them weak rather than too strong.
Well, at least making them weaker than myself. God is all powerful, so
Yeah.
anything else.
But I think the question, he says here that he wants to lighten your burden for humanity was created weak.
And the overriding question was, what kind of God does the Quran describe?
The compassionate and merciful God.
And
On
harsh.
every single page.
And harsh and judgmental.
I disagree, yeah. I think he's very harsh and judgmental.
What we're reading here, basically, what I get the impression of is the essential Quran, which are the jewels and the gems of the Quran.
As he sees them.
As he sees it. Yeah, as Clary
As he
sees it.
transfer-
As he sees
translates
them,
them.
which is a very minimalist part of the Quran. And this is kind of like reading the Bible and leaving out Revelation and
Yeah,
saying it didn't
there's
exist.
A few important surahs left out.
A
of
few
this.
important things are, a few important things? A lot of important
Yes,
things are left out.
this was like reading the Beatitudes
Very
of the
good.
Bible,
Yeah.
you know, and it's all
All the good
beautiful.
stuff.
It's all poetry.
Yeah.
Well, I have several references here that I'd like us to have a look at before we move on to the next semi-topic or whatever. On page 23, at Surah 62. Lois, you have that? Would you read it?
62?
Uh-huh.
Indeed, this is a true story, for there is no God but God, and God is surely supreme in power and wisdom.
And before we pause there, let's go to page 42. And read 171. Surah 171. Leslie, would you do that?
People of the book?
Mhm.
People of the book, do not go to excess in your religion, and do not say of God anything but truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only an envoy of God, and a word of God bestowed on Mary, and a spirit from God. So believe in God and the envoys of God, and do not speak of a trinity, for it would be better for you to stop. God alone is the one worthy of worship. Glory to God, exalted beyond having a son. To God belongs all in the heavens and the earth, and God is sufficient to manage it all.
Thank you. And there are two more I'd like us to look at. Chapter 55, cattle, is where we find this one.
Famous cow.
Page
Page,
50.
50.
excuse me, page 55.
Page 50.
Oh, the beginning of the chapter, you mean?
Is on 50.
It's on page 50. Cattle is on 50. And on page 55, at the top, Peg, would you read that for us? And when there come to you.
And when there come to you those who believe in our signs, say, Peace upon you. Your Lord is self-committed to mercy, so that if any among you do something bad in ignorance, but then repent and make amends, assuredly God is forgiving and merciful.
And the last one I'm asking for at this point is on page 162 in the section called Pure Truth. You have it, Dan? Sure. Read it, please.
It is God, unique, God the ultimate, and God does not reproduce and is not reproduced, and there is nothing at all equivalent to God. I think that follows very, with Christian tradition, with Jewish tradition. I mean, I see this, I know where he came from in terms of his timeline. He followed the Judeo-Christian concepts, incorporated them a great deal.
You're saying
into-
Muhammad did?
Muhammad.
Yeah, okay.
He incorporated a great deal of them into his revelations. The way I see his revelations is if he went into the cave and he had these revelations. And I think we can do a deep study on this, that psychologically you can pull revelations out of yourself.
You can or you do?
You can, and you usually do. Almost all revelations are self-emanating. And I think that's what he did, but he had knowledge of pre-existing religions, and he incorporated them, maybe not consciously, but certainly it's evident that his concepts of God, Adam and Eve, his reference to Jesus being a prophet, not believing in the Trinity, he's focusing his total, I won't even call it a religion. His focus was...
Call it philosophy, maybe.
Okay, his focus was on Allah. And everything else was secondary and supported Allah. And there is nothing at all equivalent to God. Again, this goes back to his concept of Allah is the source for all.
And not God?
God is Allah.
God is Allah.
We're using the word in here, God. In the original, it's Allah. We're using this because we Westerners don't understand the difference. Okay.
In my view, there is none.
Pardon me?
In my, God and Allah refer to the same.
Yeah, they're the same.
name.
Yes.
It's one and the same.
All right, so those parts that we have just read talk in terms of God being merciful.
Well, the prior one that you read, the people of the book,
Yeah.
he's referring to Christians and Jews.
Yes.
He's not
Book is the
referring
Bible.
to himself.
Right.
And he denigrates the people of the book
Yes,
a
he
great
does.
deal throughout the entire essentials.
Not in there.
He doesn't much in
The
here.
reason for the
Not as much as he
denigration,
does in the other.
the reason for the denigration is their refusal to recognize Muhammad as a messenger of God.
The final prophet.
Yeah.
The final, well,
Does he say that
Yeah.
in here? That they refuse to recognize Muhammad, or that they refuse to recognize God? Because I thought, as I was reading it, I found that there was a distinction made among people of the book. That in general, he was saying most of these people just didn't get it.
That's
But
right.
among the people of the book, there were some who truly believed in their hearts and were faithful to God. And of those, they're fine. They're saved.
They wouldn't be forced to be killed because
they're in the same rank as anyone who
No, they
commits
would-
their lives to God. Yes,
they
because
would
he
be
says
they would be classed lower than those who believe.
was that said in these
in this
pearls of wisdom? Was it? I mean,
Leslie's trying to say it here. I know she is.
I know.
Was it said in here? Because
It seems to me someplace that when he
Well, Leslie's going for her notes.
Are there not dissemblers in all of the religions, though? He doesn't speak expressly about the Jews per se. Anyone who dissembles, anyone who
yeah.
pretends to believe in God,
Yes,
but
the
does
pretend-
not,
Yes, those who say we believe, but
but don't.
Be they Muslims, I'm reading from page 9. This is in the cow. Line 62.
Line 62.
Page 9. Be they Muslims, Jews, Christians, or Sabians, is that how you pronounce that?
Sure.
Those who believe in God and the last day and who do good have their reward with their Lord. They have nothing to fear, and they will not sorrow. And he says that several times. And the notes that Cleary has on this say, because I didn't know what Sabians were, and he says,
Zoroastrians might
well,
be.
yeah, let's see. Might be Zoroastrianism or Buddhism or these, Sabian seems to have been understood, depending on time and situation, to include other great Eastern religions, like Zoroastrianism or Buddhism. So, I mean, I read that to mean that, you know, there are some people who are following the book or following other religions who, if they submit to God, they're saved, just as one who follows Muhammad.
Yes.
And he also gives value to the other prophets, or not prophets, but other people that have been revealed to, who were from other religions.
The other messengers.
Well, messengers was one word he used for them. But I think, did I read maybe in the notes that there were something like 128,000 of them that were acknowledged? And that certainly wasn't... Did you read that?
That's just a representative number.
Yes.
It's not a specific number.
No, well, not a specific number, but it seems a large number that are acknowledged, and certainly not all from the...
But it said some known and some unknown.
Yes.
Like, some of them are famous, like Jesus, but others...
So there were a lot of people that things were revealed to, but you didn't get to God by intercession, whereas to a certain extent in some of the Christian religions, intercession's important, and obviously Jesus would be an intercession.
I didn't see that you even knew that there was Mohammed in this.
I agree with you.
I agree.
That somebody said something about that you had to accept Mohammed. And I don't think that's true at all. I think he considered himself just another prophet, just as Noah was and Moses and Abraham. Of course, it all started with Abraham. And he was just the latest one.
Yes.
And
That
you,
was his-
excuse me?
That was his position, yes.
That it was coming through his voice. God was speaking. This is God speaking, not Muhammad. This whole writing is God speaking.
Through Muhammad.
Through Muhammad, yes.
Yes.
And I understood it to say that this was respected, this God respect all gods. The same God throughout was the Jewish God, the Christian God, and the Islamic God were all one. Did you understand that? That's the tilde I got.
That's what I got.
But not
That there was
pagan
an
gods.
absolute God.
But not pagan gods.
No.
Or gods.
Pardon?
Now you're talking about gods.
Yeah,
Yes.
Well, that's why he was trying to form this religion, to get rid of all the 360 pagan gods that were around at that time.
the Quraysh were polytheistic. And they were also his worst enemy, because they were the guardians of the Kaaba, and they did not like him, saying there's only one God.
Okay, well, the history of that's not in here, Andrew, but why would it have been important for him to form a religion that was monotheistic? You're on to it, but...
Yes,
I just
but
don't...
it's not written here.
But we can certainly think about it.
Should I think out loud? I hate to go against the rules, but... Well, at that time, the world, the Arab world was in such a turmoil with all their different tribal wars and all. And especially the paganism was so...
Suppose you came from a background that was polytheistic. Why would anybody want to make all of these peoples monotheistic?
To give them a clear path and a direction.
Practical reason?
And direction for their path to God. To a pure understanding, to give them, let somebody say something.
Well, I don't
Me,
think
it
just
would be a
Never
great
been
idea.
inspired with the true word of
Well, sure,
God.
that's the
If you
path
get
to
the
God.
true word of God, you must convert everybody around you. If you indeed have a belief, and you have a belief contrary to that of your surrounding people, And that belief is so firmly fixed in you that you absolutely think that this is the truth and the only truth, then you're out to convince everybody.
All right.
There's also the point that it's politically expedient to have unity.
That's what they were after.
What a word.
Yes.
I think that's what
Wait
it's
a
all
minute,
about.
you think they were just,
Excuse me a second. You
Well, to
think,
have one God would either bring peace or it would be political. If it was to bring peace and everybody believed in the same thing, you were unified, you were working for the same thing, or it was for power. If you could get everybody to believe in this one thing and get people working for this one thing, it might be an evil thing, then it was a political, but it was just motive either way.
You think his motivation was political in what sense?
He wanted to unify. He wanted to stop the constant civil wars
Among his own people?
among his
The
own
tribes.
people, among the
Yeah.
tribes.
and there is a verse in here that says about letting blood, where is it? It's near the beginning, isn't it?
Well, I think that was in the section on the cow. And he was really talking about Moses. That, I could not understand that. And I went to the Quran and then I went to the Bible to understand that, how he was admonishing them because they let the blood of their brothers and all of their companions. And so that was in a different context than what we're trying to get at now. But I don't know that he said that outside of the story, you know, that you should not persecute your own. But I think he was trying to establish a community and laying down all of these laws to help the poor and the orphans. And I think that he was so influenced by the Judeo-Christian God that he believed in that. And he saw that a lot of the Christians and the Jews did not live good lives. And they professed to believe in God, but it didn't carry into their morals. And so I think that's what bothered him. And so he was trying to just sort of cast out all of those people who did not believe, and he gave credit to the Christians and the Jews who did. But that was the most important thing for him. You know, you have to believe and you have to live this good life. And that's really all that you have to do. That was his religion.
Did he believe, or was he
Yes.
calculating? Was he political, or was he really religious?
Are you
Both.
suggesting that he didn't
Both?
believe?
In what
Oh,
sense?
sure, he believed.
He believed, but he was also calculating in that well, of course, as you say, if you really believe, you want everybody else to believe too.
But this is not Mohammed's words, this is God's words.
Yes.
Through Muhammad.
Through Mohammed.
No, but these are God's words.
Through Muhammad.
This is God's
This
words.
is
Through
If indeed he
Muhammad.
believes.
All right.
Now, May, this is what you're looking for. For those that have complete editions, it's the fourth surah, the 29th verse.
No, let's not.
It's on
go there
page
now.
33, at the
Which
top of
section is it?
33.
Is it in,
Is it in this one, the essential?
Yeah,
Have you got
stop.
the essential?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the top, page 33
oh, okay.
in this.
He is he's in our book.
It says, O believers, do not consume your wealth among yourselves in vain, but may there be trade out of mutual consent among you, and do not kill yourselves, for truly God has been merciful to you. Anyone who does kill through enmity and oppression, we will expose to fire, and that is easy for God.
Yeah, that's one of the sections I was looking for, Andrew. Thank you. And the other was on page 10 that I think maybe Lois has already shot down. It's the, do we call these surahs or lines? It's 84, 85.
The individual things are called ayat or verses. You use the word verses.
I've been using verses.
Yes.
Okay.
Why don't you read it? I don't have a book.
All right. And when
Where is
we
he?
took your promise and you would not shed the blood of your own, and would not drive your own from their homes. You then confirmed it, as you yourselves bear witness. But then you yourselves killed your own people, and drove a group from among you out of their homes, assisting efforts against them with iniquity and enmity. And I think that what Lois was saying is,
He's talking about Moses.
Is he?
Yes. I wondered, why is this called the cow?
Me too.
does
And
anybody
so-
have a notion?
Right. Oh, so anyway, I said, then I went to the Quran, and then I went to Exodus in the Bible, because it's all the same story, really. And the cow is the calf, the golden calf, that the people set up when Moses was up talking to God, and they were getting restless. And Aaron says, well, give me all of your gold, and he made a cow.
This is the cow.
And then Moses came down and saw them, and Moses was so upset.
I think it is.
And he ground it up, and they drank it. There might be even something in here. They had to drink their idol. And then he was so upset that he started this warfare, and about, I think, was it 3,000 or 300 were killed, that Moses just called for the ones who were true believers, and they were the Levites who followed him in this massacre. And that's what he's referring to this. And then Moses went back up, and God had said, oh, he was so angry he's going to destroy them all. And Moses says, no, don't do that. Give us another chance. And so he wrote out the commandments again. And the people repented then. But now I'm going quite a bit out of the essential Quran.
Yeah,
But I think that you just can't read the one, it's part of, the whole Old Testament.
Why is that? The stories are so related.
You have to know the Old Testament to really know the history and to understand what he's writing about.
Why is that? Why did he incorporate it? What's
Well, because
his
he
connection?
believed in the book, in the Torah and the Gospels. He believed in it all. And that's why it's just a continuation, and he's just another prophet. And he's just calling people, he's saying that you didn't do what Moses wanted you to do, the Jews, or what Jesus called people to do. And so this is another call for them to do good, to believe.
But why do I think he thinks he's the last call? Does that say that? Did I read that someplace else? But he was the last prophet.
Well,
to
I
come on.
never saw any personal thing in this at all.
Does he say that he's the last prophet?
Well, it's God.
Or
No,
do-
he doesn't even-
Or do the Muslims say that he is the
Maybe
last?
that's the way it
The
is.
Muslim, he doesn't say,
Yeah.
this is Muhammad who's writing it, I'm the last prophet.
No.
It's
At
God
least I
speaking.
didn't
Here I
find
go
that in
again.
here.
It's God speaking. Mohammed couldn't write. Thank you. He was
That's right.
illiterate.
He was illiterate, wasn't he?
Yes, but he spoke gorgeous poetry, apparently.
So the story goes, yeah.
Well, I've read that you really cannot appreciate the Quran unless you read it in the classical Arabic.
What sort of an appreciation do you mean? Appreciate the Quran, reading them?
Well, understand it, and I guess just enjoy it and appreciate it.
But how much are we supposed to understand this? Aren't we supposed to be reflecting upon all these verses? Wasn't that the intent, to reflect?
Yes.
And if we do that, isn't it possible that all of us would come up with a different meaning for every verse?
Interesting point. Because does any two of us ever think alike anyway?
Right.
No.
Do any two of us ever see the same thing exactly
That goes
alike?
back to your first question.
Why, sure we do.
About man being weak? What was that first question?
He's,
Something like why were we created weaker, something like that.
all right. We haven't,
Time, but we answered that first question. Go ahead.
no, we haven't finished with that one. We haven't talked about the vengeance that God might wreak upon us. And is God fair?
I just found several passages that I thought showed contradictions
Okay?
and certainly showed that God wasn't tolerant or forgiving. And
You want to name some of those for us?
in the cow,
Back to the cow,
back to the cow,
the golden calf.
It is the longest surah in the Quran.
verses 6 and 7.
6, 7.
As for the grateful who refuse, it is the same to them whether you warn them or not, they do not believe. God has sealed their hearts and their hearing and covered their eyes. Right? To me, that says there's no room for redemption. You know? And I think that contradicts.
And it goes on to that last line, Peg, that makes it very clear. For them there is a great torment.
And then,
How about the next page, Peg, before you go?
Okay.
Page 3, the second verse.
yes, there is a sickness in their hearts, and God has made them sicker. And theirs is a painful torment because they are, in fact, lying. God made them sicker. I mean, that doesn't show me mercy.
The first thing is that they decide not to believe in the divine revelation. The God making them sicker is a consequence of their action. As a result of your disbelief, you are going to suffer this punishment.
But no, I found a lot of places where I almost felt like it was predestination.
I did too.
On 83, it says, "And whoever God gives no light has no light at all." As though if you decided you wanted to get the light, you just couldn't get it. I mean, God bestows it on whoever. And above that, at the top, it says, "And God provides without measure to whomever God will." So if you're one picked out, okay. If you're not picked out, forget it.
Yeah, the same thing on page 70, verse, I guess it's 178. Those whom God does guide are thus those rightly guided, and those whom God leads astray are the ones who lose.
But that, can I go back to the verse that you just read on 83, and whoever God gives no light has no light at all? I think that shows how everybody can read something different into this, because the way I read that is not, okay, I choose to give you light, but not you. Rather, that if you have light, it is because God gave it to you. And that the light comes from God. And without the light that comes from God, there is no light. In other words, it all comes from God. I mean, I'm reading that just as the power of God, and that all comes from God, rather than God choosing one or the other. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
It's very Christian.
Sounds to me like predestination.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I mean, that's just what I'm hearing in this, because the whole way through, it's simply God is great, everything comes from God. You know, that seems to be the message that is pounding through this whole thing for me.
But there is self-will. I mean, there is the individual will. Somehow or another, you got to skirt around that.
So if you've got whatever it is you have, whatever positive thing you have, whatever light you have,
Well, back up
that came from God. So you should be grateful.
How does that differ, or does that differ from any of the religions that you know of?
I don't know that it differs.
You don't know that it
Does
does
not.
differ?
I don't know that much about other religions.
Leslie, on that same page, in the second verse there,
Are we talking about the cow page 2.
No.
We're now on
We're in
page
light on
83,
page
sorry.
83. As for the ungrateful who do not have faith, their works are like a mirage on a plain, which the thirsty man thinks to be water until he comes to it and finds nothing there. But he finds God in his presence, and God pays him his earnings, and God is swift in accounting. And,
Well, why don't we read the next verse too, Sarah? Go ahead.
or like the darkness in an ocean deep and vast, covered over with waves, upon them waves, over them clouds, darknesses one on top of another. If one stretched forth a hand, one would hardly see it. And whoever God gives no light has no light at all. I think that means that if you don't have faith, if you don't believe, you don't have the light. But I don't think it's an arbitrary thing. I think you have to believe, and you have the light, and God will give it to you. But you also not only have to believe in God, but you have to live properly. You have to do all the things that He's telling you to do, such as give charity to orphans and widows and other things like that, and be generous, and not disregard the basic rules of being kind to humankind.
But doesn't Islam itself mean submission to God?
Yes.
How do you say
Yeah.
submission?
What do you call
Submission to the will of God.
in that paragraph right at the very beginning, where the conversation got, which is the second paragraph of the cow? What did you understand those who believe in the unseen to mean?
Have you gone back to the chapter on the cow? What page?
To the original one that you were talking about, those who believe in the unseen. What did you say you believed the unseen to mean?
Well, what do you have a notion about what it means?
Well, I think that in the
Well,
the
you don't
notes
see
it
God.
says, yes, but in the notes it says the humility about the extent of the knowledge that humans can reach. So that to believe in the unseen is to have humility about the extent to which I can, that I as a human can reach.
But I don't understand what your question is about.
Well, that
Would you
isn't a
repeat that?
question. Well, you have to have, you're talking about having faith and faith in God or belief in God. That means believing in the unseen, and the unseen means to have humility about the extent of that I as a human being, my knowledge can reach. So I have to accept this completely on faith, otherwise I'm not being faithful.
This is true of almost all religions.
It may be true of all religions, but it is particularly a very prominent part of this, that we mustn't have the arrogance that we could possibly understand. And the unseen, and that's what the unseen, not the belief in the unseen being the belief in God. The belief in the unseen and the steady practice of prayer is not a belief here in God. It is a belief in our own, I believe that I know that I have a very limited ability to have knowledge about these things.
About these things?
Well,
about everything?
Well, what I'm saying, the unseen is not God. This doesn't say those who believe in God. It would have said those who believe in God. It is saying those who believe in the unseen. And the unseen here is humility about the extent of human knowledge, that human knowledge can reach, something like that. It's not. This doesn't mean belief in God and steadily practicing prayer. It means that I believe that I have a finite knowledge. I, as a human being, can't reach this.
It's a limited.
I don't
It's
think
a
that's
limitation.
inconsistent with the belief in God, though.
No.
I'm not saying it's inconsistent, but when you were reading this, the interpretation was, that's what I was sort of frustrated about, is that I believe in, that it's a belief in a God, but that's not what you're saying. And give of what we have provided them.
And those who believe what has been sent down to you, and what was sent down before you, and are certain of the hereafter.
Finish the sentence.
That is the end of the sentence.
Isn't there a comma?
That's a
No,
dot.
it's a
That's
Yeah,
a
period.
period.
that's a period.
Need my glasses changed?
They follow guidance from their Lord, and they are the happy ones.
Does that help?
As for the ungrateful, who refuse, it is the same to them whether you warn them or not. They do not believe. God has sealed their hearts and their hearing and covered their eyes. For them there is great torment.
Didn't he consider himself, along with Jesus and
The he being
Moses, a warner?
Yes.
And that is-
Muhammad.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's
He called
meant to
himself
be,
a warner.
that is meant to be evidence of free will, that verse.
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
As for the ungrateful who refuse, it is the same to them, whether you warn them or not. They do not believe. That is meant to be evidence that it's a denial of God, and it's evidence of free will, as far as the notes are concerned.
Well, free will's been mentioned here before. I think it was Helen.
There was
It
free
says
will
on
in the story of
168.
Adam, too, that Adam had free will.
168 free will.
I think
It
we've
is the same to
established.
them whether they warn
notes.
them or not. Well, it's explaining this.
Explaining which, Dorothy?
This
Oh, on
paragraph.
page 2. These page numbers are getting a little bit out of hand. The note on 168 explains the verse on page 2.
I had trouble with the notes. I had more trouble with the notes than I did with the essential Quran.
Somebody read it. It is the same to them whether you warn them or not. Muhammad's message was only to deliver a clear message, not to coerce people into professing belief. Whether or not someone believes is a matter that is up to God and the God-given reason and free will of the individual.
Okay, that fits with something on page 15.
Yes.
Well, on 2, and it's the 5th verse on page
Yes.
2, not the 2nd verse.
There is to be no compulsion in religion.
That's the one.
Does this all sound very familiar?
Yeah, go, the whole verse.
There is to be no compulsion in religion. True direction is in fact distinct from error. So whoever disbelieves in idols and believes in God has taken hold of the most reliable handle, which does not break. For God is all-hearing and all-knowing.
I just asked whether this seems very familiar to you. Would you have to be a Muslim to understand this, or is this just Christianity, Judaism, Muslimism, the whole business?
That's what it's
Is wherein does it differ?
Does each of the religions say there will be no compulsion in religion?
I don't know whether they say it or not, but there's certainly that's what's happened, hasn't it?
No, they say it, but they don't believe it.
We got the right answer. We all do.
Yes, unfortunately.
Page 70. I want to pick up this, another contradiction. 177, 181. A bad example are the people who have repudiated our signs, thus oppressing their own souls. Those whom God does guide are thus those rightly guided. And those God leads astray are the ones who lose. How can God lead anyone astray?
The question crossed my mind.
I bet it did. And we have made for hell, listen to this, and we have made for hell many spirits and humans.
Sprites.
Right.
Sprites and humans. They have hearts, but do not understand with them. And they have eyes, but do not see with them. And they have ears, but do not hear with them. They are like cattle, hello, the cow, that even more astray, they are the heedless ones. The most beautiful names are God's, so call on God by them, avoiding those who profane the names. They will be given their due for what they have been doing. So, if you know, it's kind of like if you've been exposed to these ideas and you don't accept them, you're going to hell.
That's what this says.
It's kind of the feeling you get.
That's what it says all the way through, I think.
Well,
Yes,
here,
You have to
If you don't
believe.
accept my way of thinking, you're going to hell.
well, here is,
What's unusual about that? though?
Okay, it's the same old story.
But it's not my way of thinking.
On page-
It's God's way of thinking.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Because
Through
people have to
Mohammed.
people have to be accountable for their deeds. You know, that's what he's telling you. You have-
on page 108,
Beasts do not have choice. That's
That-
what he's saying in this place here.
Yes,
He is saying beasts do not have choice. And these people that do have choice are even worse than beasts who don't have choice.
on page 183 is
Are you
Cleary-
into the notes?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank
I
you.
did say we could go to the notes, so.
Yes, we did.
Cleary's note is this: God's creation provides faculties and facilities for both understanding and confusion, including the perception, reason, and free will by which humankind is enabled to choose between the two highways or the two possible uses of these facilities, the way of enlightenment and the way of delusion. Those who are like beasts are even more astray because the beasts do not have the choice afforded humans.
It's what I said, accountability.
I'm waiting for something. What
Yeah, I
does it
mean,
mean?
what's the-
to you?
what's the punchline?
That people have to be
We have
accountable
free
for their.
will, and we can choose to accept this or reject it.
But if you're like a beast, you have no free will.
But as
But
human
it is
beings,
Those
we
who
are
are
accountable.
like beasts. In
I
other
thi-
words, if you act like an animal and you're human, you actually go below the rank of an animal.
May
Not
I?
quite the vegetable, but, you know, you're,
Well, in most
we're not supposed to
religions-
act solely on instinct.
But if you're not knowledgeable of the way and the knowledge of the words, what are you then?
But
Just ignorant, you're not.
no, but through this book, the one thing he says is God is everywhere. There's all of these signs. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. There's water, there are breezes, there's sky, there's food, there's you have a partner, all of these things. And isn't that a sign of God?
It's a sign
And-
of paganism.
No, he.
Well, no,
You just worshipped all the pagan idols.
What would a scientist?
Every
here,
one of
it's
them.
in here.
I understand that,
He
but
says
all of those are pagan idols.
they're signs of God.
What would a
God is
scientist say?
unknowable.
What would a scientist say to what you've just said? Are they signs of God? Or are they natural phenomenons that he can explain?
Paganism.
And
Goes back to
paganism
the-
is a god, is it?
The
An
reason
idol that
the
you would-
reason I bring it up is because he has in here that there's evidence of God everywhere. So you can't say that you're just ignorant of it. That was my point. It's you can't say you're ignorant of God because all of these things are supposedly signs.
But if you
of
are
God.
ignorant and you see a rock, what does that mean?
You
Well,
should
God created
Without
everything.
having the
God
word
created.
exposed to you. What does that make
No,
you?
because he includes other religions and says if you have a worshipful attitude toward God.
I'm not
and
talking about
toward- and
religion. I'm
other
talking about a
believers.
man walks down the road and he sees a rock. And he has no knowledge of God whatsoever.
But he has respect for nature.
But if you are in awe
He has.
of that rock,
he's
if
part
you
of
are in
nature.
awe of that,
What are
if
you trying to present? I get you to the rock, but I don't know what you're doing.
Let's let Dan finish with this rock
If you
question.
worship the rock, you're a pig.
I
But
see.
I would have said that, I think that Muhammad would have said that Dan had an attachment to temporal things
and to human inventory, when really Dan should be remembering his origin from Adam, whom God created, and not practice idolatry where you are putting, let me try and get this right, not practice idolatry, which is to say that, what is idolatry in this one? Yeah, right. What does idolatry mean in this? It means to forget the real, which is God. I will look up and see what they have.
It's focusing on something worldly, focusing on something in the world and saying this is more important than God, or this is worth worship. My money is worth worship.
Yes,
My power is worth worship. This rock is worth worship. Science is worth worship. If you worship that logic of your science, if you worship this solidness of this rock without taking into account that God created that.
And you.
Here we go.
And you, then
That's a belief.
you focused. Well, I'm just
That's a
saying
belief
what
that you may have,
I'm
but
just
suppose
saying.
I don't have it. Suppose I don't believe.
Well, then you're worse than cattle. I guess that's what he
But
said.
your hell is not my hell. I don't have such a hell.
I'm just going by the
Yes,
book.
yes. And I would, there's another time
Okay.
when you
And
said,
the flip side of that coin
yes.
is the thing that man has had real problems with was trying to make known, such as Muhammad, the unknowable. Because I think even Muhammad would recognize that God is totally unknowable.
You can believe in God. You may not know anything about him. You can have a belief.
So anything that we say is man's interpretation and his perception
His belief.
and his perception of what he wants to see.
His belief, I insist.
He creates his own God.
Yeah, that's his belief.
And even if all the trees on earth were pens and the ocean ink, backed up by 7 more oceans, the words of God would not be exhausted, for God is infinite in power and wisdom.
And the infiniteness of God is something that we have yet to learn how to deal with. Because if God is infinite, it is all-encompassing everything. And there can be neither evil, nor good, nor anything else without the express consent of this so-called supreme being.
Now, to go back to your thing about the rock.
Wait.
No, there is, no, I'm going back to Mr. Clary's notes.
What page are you on, Andrew?
I think
Page
Dan was
200.
getting to a more interesting point.
That's all right.
Okay,
This is on,
Age.
you have 10 seconds.
all right, it says here, this is referring to the surah called the Slanderer, which is on 156. And it says, revealed at Mecca. Materialism is generally considered a form of shirk, or idolatry in Islam. Materialists who accumulate their wealth by routinely attacking others are among the most base. This can be done in many professions. But the idea of idolatry being shirk, or materialism being shirk, which is the exact opposite of the unity of God.
Yeah.
And also shirk is probably the worst thing is the worst thing in Islam. It's the exact opposite, just that everything that is positive.
All right, so this means, what you just said means that whoever practices shirk has rejected the signs of God.
Yes.
All right, and on page 19, there is a verse that says, surely for those who reject the signs of God, there is a torment most severe, and God is a mighty avenger. What's that got to do with free will?
You have the will, you have the right to accept or reject, and if you reject, you are subject to this torment most severe.
So why should I have free will?
Because you can, in the framework of belief in God, use the free will to engage in any profession you want,
Or you're
decide
believing
what
God.
service you want to perform to those less fortunate,
But the real thing
Belief in
about,
God does not mean you lose your free will.
yes, you do. You
Yes.
have to.
It means surrender.
That
It
means
ha-
you're
you have
rough
to.
then,
I don't
Dan.
see that.
You have to give up your free will to God and to the practice of the way He expresses the way of life, so to speak, in order not to go to hell. You have to give up your free will to the belief and practice of God.
But
the
you're not
church.
giving up your free will if
You
you're
sure are.
believing
You're freely
in
giving it up.
God.
Yes.
Your
You're
free will
free
to
to give it up,
decide.
but you're not
One-
giving it up with your belief in God
One at a
because you've
time.
used it.
But you have to give up yourself to God.
Yeah, surrender.
Surrender. That's what this is all about. Total,
But-
complete surrender to God.
But that does, that if you say you surrender, if you no longer have free will, then you'd have to say, okay, I had to, choose, then you'd have to, somehow find in here a justification for you wanting to be an architect.
But there's no justification in here for free will.
So in other words, everyone would become a robot, and there would be no choice, no way of choosing a profession,
If,
no way of choosing how far you want to go in education.
if you are going to spend eternity with Allah, you have to give up your free will on earth and live in accordance with the book.
That doesn't
That's
mean
true
you
of all
couldn't be an
religions, right?
architect.
Yes.
Isn't that essentially it? You're choosing the right way,
Yes.
the appropriate way. You're
No.
making the proper choice.
The
And that's the only way
conscientious
you're going to
way.
become one with Allah.
Right.
But
Oh,
it's
God.
not, what you seem to be inferring that means you become somewhat mechanical. You become, you have no way of choosing anything.
Here are the rules. right
Without-
here. They're laid out in detail, how to live your life. Part of the Quran goes political. In fact, the basis of this in conjunction with politics is your whole life is dedicated to this concept. Your political life, your personal life, how you copulate are all part of the way to live, and it's very expressed in the Quran.
Religion is thought of by many as a way of life, but
It's a total way of life.
but that does not mean that
That's
you
true though of any
become.
religion, is it not? I
Sure
mean,
it
what
is.
are you,
All
what are
right,
you really
certain
getting
Can
at?
pra-
Can
we
we
read
read
what
Thomas Clary
Certain practices are prohibited, yes, but not everything.
174.
I'm Sarah.
It's not R-U-R.
Sarah, please.
What page are you on now?
On 174 is the note.
And he's referring to
This
page
first
11.
full paragraph, he says, and he's quoting from page 11, "They hurt no one thereby except by leave of God. Free will is part of God-given human nature. Without free will, there would be no trial or test, no means for humanity to awaken and become conscious of its God-given potential. Those who bought it had no share in the hereafter. Those who acquired harmful knowledge or became devotees of harmful magic cut themselves off from reality by obsession with their fascinations and ambitions."
So,
It's either my way or the highway.
But I found that it was interesting in this book, as I read this, that obsession was used. The devil was the obsessor, and
Yes.
and we didn't talk about sins in here. We talked about obsessions,
Right.
and I actually quite liked that. I mean, as far as reading through it, that was something that appealed to me, because
Obsessed.
because I obsess. Right.
You don't have a license to say that to Leslie.
No, but when you are in an but I don't, okay, now you made me lose my train of thought. Thank you very much. Move on.
I think
But go ahead and grab it, because you're
Because
going
it wasn't
somewhere
just,
with it.
obsession was not just, sometimes it was Satan and sometimes it was evil. It was bad things.
Well, but I mean,
Obsession
it was
would be used for both of them.
the act of obsessing over something in this world, over, and I don't remember it, specifically saying, women or alcohol or something like that, but just the fact that you're obsessing over something in this world that is base compared with God, is the problem. And I don't know. That appealed to me more than the Christian concept of, or the popular Christian concept that is often leveled at me of sin, of doing things bad. Whereas obsession, you could see how that was sort of self-inflicted.
If you obsess, you have made an idol of it. So that gets in the way of God.
This is
An
a very
idol-
practical religion or concept. It's very practical. So it has the psychological thing of obsession in it, which is much more realistic in terms of our world. And I think it's much more psychologically oriented than the religions as they have been taught, such as Christianity and Buddhism, all the other religions. And that is an excellent point, that it is more acceptable. And one of the reasons I think that he has been able to make it more acceptable is because he takes himself out of the equation. He is a direct link to the concepts of God, and he takes himself out. He's not leading anything. Sometimes in here you see where he says we, and I almost got the impression that he was talking about himself in consultation with, or in direct connection with God. I definitely had that feeling that he felt that he was so much in tune, so much of a conduit, that the we almost came out as we, God and I.
But he was very specific many times.
I know he was.
Where he said that this isn't, the messenger isn't God, and the
Right.
messenger mustn't think himself to be God, not whether it was Muhammad or whoever it was. And I have got this bit about the idolatry. And it is treating something relative.
Where are you?
Well, I'm just saying from the notes, treating something relative as if it were absolute. God is absolute. And as far as I could find, that was the only absolute. And he knows everything. He knows everything. And anything where you are taking something as relative and treating it as absolute, and to a certain extent, when you are talking about your rock, you are taking something that he, having been revealed this from God, would say was relative, not absolute. And the only absolute is God. So that any idolatry is literally, as you would put it, not accepting God as absolute, and the only absolute. Everything else is relative.
That is your definition.
Well, when they talk about idolatry, when he talks about idolatry,
It's Cleary's definition, isn't
Yes.
it, Jonquil?
yes, and that, I mean, I could probably find the note where he says that, but I think I'd written it down exactly. So it's Cleary's definition of what is
So in a
meant
sense,
by
he's saying we
idols.
human beings are frail. We can't really realize anything, and therefore we postulate some being that is solid, substantial, rock-like, if you will, that knows everything and cannot be wrong. Is that right?
Well, I would say that's a pretty good
The absolute
definition.
authority.
And that when we come up to object to it, then we can be criticized as taking something that's relative and making it absolute, and forgetting and being attached to our temporal, our ability to think and our knowledge and our human inventory.
Can I say there are no absolutes for us? Absolutely no absolutes.
Certainly, I believe that that is what God revealed to Muhammad, and he's revealing here. or he's saying here,
If you accept
there
the
is
God,
no
if you accept the
other
idea that there is
absolute.
somebody who is
That's if he's-
interfacing with
Yes,
me.
but that's what he is accepting and telling
Mm-hmm.
you that you must accept, and this is how he is saying it. God's the absolute. And that anything that, if we come up with any other, then this is idolatry. We are only relative, we can't think, we can't. So that is what I am hearing there.
It's idolatry if you go outside of the purview of his way of thinking.
You're making
He's defining it for you.
You're making something that is relative.
Yeah,
absolute.
he's defining
And there's
it.
only
It's
one
idolatry
absolute.
if there's an insincerity about it. He's accepted Judaism, Christianity, and his own religion in a proper practice. They're all valid.
Yes.
It's the improprieties that make it idolatry. It's when you are, your actions are false with respect to what you state to be your belief.
That's why there,
Life, yeah.
that's why there is a verse saying that the Trinity is not correct.
I saw that a number of times.
The idea of, because it goes to the idea of attaching a partner to God, which is one of the main themes. You cannot have a partner with God. There's only one God. He does not have a son. He does not have an assistant. He's able to do everything himself.
I was even surprised that he threw in angels. That really surprised me, that he threw in angels. Because if there's no God but Allah, and Allah is only the one and only, where did the angels come from? But he threw them in there.
He created
He
them.
created
They are
them.
creatures
Hey.
of his as well.
And actually, it's the angel,
Even that bad one.
yes, whatever his name is. I
bad one.
forgot.
Iblis.
Gabriel.
Iblis,
Oh, Iblis,
who
yeah.
was the cause of the fall.
Right.
It wasn't Adam eating the apple.
But he was only permitted to fall because God permitted it.
Yes.
It's kind of cool. He's got all the handles.
And since we brought up Iblis, I would like to turn to that. Where do we have him?
It bothers me though, Dan, that you say that God controlled, and so man really didn't have free will, but he did have free will.
Page 62.
He did,
You say he controlled everything and predicted it or something.
If
You have trouble with free will, I think.
I have a problem with the concept of a supreme being that is all-knowing, created everything, has everything totally under his control, and still sits out there and judges us as if we were some kind of plaything.
No mercy.
And, we're going to play games with these. Let's make some creatures and play toys with them. It goes back to mythology. This goes back to Greek mythology, when the gods were sitting up here and playing with the mortals. And that's probably where it came from. But it's that whole concept of an infinite, supreme being that is not responsible for something beyond anything and everything that exists as a result of his being.
well, let's see, Lois, how do you respond to that?
Well, I don't know, I was just wondering, I don't really know the distinction between predestination and free will as, taught in Catholicism, but your background is Catholicism.
My background is multiple.
But if that's where your confusion begins.
I don't think I'm confused. If my confusion is because I don't agree with something you're thinking, yes, then I'm
No, it's
confused.
got-
It seems to me, if you look, Dan, at the history of mankind, if you look at all of the different peoples that have existed, they've all of them been faced with problems that they've not been able to really come at grips with and to solve. And they have necessarily created for themselves the idea that there must be a being. There must indeed be a being in which I can find the solace of relief from these problems, which persist, whether I be in Iceland as a native or in India or wherever I am. There is a religious feeling that I need that support, that I am a frail human being, and that there are limitations to what I can know and what I can do. So I create these things. So I
Well-
make them. Well, all right. If you don't want to create them, what are you left with?
It's the concept of moving from the pagan rituals, the prehistory.
They were religious rituals.
They were prehistory. You go back into the archetypal beings and the whole concept of man's thinking, and we haven't studied Campbell. If you go back to man moving from paganism to monotheism, that was quite a jump, a major jump. And
Isn't that, though, exactly what the Quran is supposed
Yeah.
to be doing?
exactly.
Well, let's-
It's a jump from paganism and idolatry to an individual monotheism based upon Judaism and Christianity. And he had a specific
And his
purpose in doing it.
His revelation from
But
God.
he had a
Yes,
purpose in doing it.
Yes.
And
I
it
don't know
was
if he had a
political.
purpose or if it was just his belief.
Let's let
No,
Lois finish that, whatever she's
she
doing
asked
over
the
there.
question, is it a purpose or a belief? He had a purpose in doing it because one of the things that he had going was a mass of tribes out here killing each other off, subsisting literally off of each other. I mean, that's how they lived. That's how they made their living, is by stealing from you and stealing from you. That's how we got along. And he had to find a way in his mind of pulling these people together. His
Was he a
method,
conniver, Dan?
not a conniver, a believer. A believer in more than this subsistence of beating each other up and stealing everything from you and you and you. It was,
He was trying to unify the tribes.
well, that was his goal.
Yeah,
He
and
was,
That was
he
his
was,
only
like
goal?
Adam Smith
No,
said in
no,
our
it wasn't his
last,
only goal.
last year, he found a need and filled it.
And he found a way of filling that need.
Well, don't you think that he could have just truly had a revelation?
I think he
There
did.
was,
I think he
this
believed
isn't
he
something,
did.
yeah, this isn't something that he
I'm
did
not saying
contrive.
he didn't have a revelation, okay? What I'm saying is that his revelation had a very specific purpose.
And didn't Charles say that earlier today?
Yes, he did.
Unity was the word.
But I don't
They
think
unify.
revelations can have a purpose. I don't think you
Oh.
have purposeful revelations.
Have you had a revelation, Lois?
No, I never have. How can I say that then? You're no authority. Take that back.
I don't think that Dan is saying that he created this whole thing because he wanted to unify the tribes. I'm saying, I guess he's, if I understand him correctly, is that he had this overwhelming idea or this overwhelming belief that the tribes could be unified, that the way in which it could be done would be if there were indeed some God, some singular God
Not
that he
exactly.
could describe.
No, that
Okay,
isn't what
then
I'm
you tell
saying.
me.
No,
That's
that's not what I'm saying.
That's
He was,
cynical when he's saying it's a revelation.
Well, do you think you
Before-
can have a revelation and then later on you realize, or other people might realize for you, how it could be used for unification? But he may have had truly the revelation at first. He may have later seen how the unification, and then other people might grab it and run with it politically.
Well, I think that's probably what happened.
I
but-
think that's
yeah.
what.
Well, a couple of people here have read the entire, several people have read the entire Quran. And maybe if there's anything that you see particularly important to yourself, or different from Cleary's selections and translation, tell us.
Cleary is the jewel of the Nile, so to speak. It's the jewel in the crown, and it's all the good stuff. If you go into the Quran, it not only gives you a lot of negative, but it also takes in a lot of the history.
And it gives you specific law.
And it gives you
If
very
you
specific
commit
law.
this wrong, you're going to be punished in this method, and that's what happens.
Right.
It's very specific.
And if you look at it hard enough, you can probably find out where Al-Qaeda gets its justification for its actions. It's in there.
I don't know why, but jumped into my mind was Santayana's expression, "There is no God and Jesus is his son." Does anybody remember that at all? George Santayana, Columbia?
I do not remember that.
There is no God and Jesus is his son. It's a very perplexing little statement.
Yeah,
About
it is.
Yeah.
That's quite logical.
Did you get that out of the Quran?
No,
No,
out of George
it's
Santayana,
not in the
I said.
Quran.
Did George Santayana get it out of the Quran?
I'm not sure.
Lois, what did you find in the
Well,
Quran that,
I
that you
agree.
really felt we needed to be
I agree
knowledgeable
that
about?
in the beginning, I said, this is just like reading the Beatitudes, that you do not understand the Quran without going to the whole book itself.
But what don't we understand?
Well, just what Barry said. There you get all of the laws and the punishments and the history. And I think it's very important that Americans do not understand, or most of them do not understand, the continuity between Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And I think that's why we chose the book, and I think you've got to be very careful not to put a negative connotation on it, because you can interpret anything, in different ways.
Well,
and I think instead you got to look at the positive thing, that the mutuality, if there is such a word, of the major religions of Americans.
Well, the
And
frailty of
Americans
all
are
of us.
not aware, that they believe in Moses and Abraham and Jesus.
You don't think Clary made that point in his selections?
Oh, he does, but I say Americans.
Oh, okay.
Americans do not know that.
Lois or Dan, was there anything in this book that you felt seemed slanted, as in by taking some of the things out and putting this in? I mean, I noticed so much of the notes that he had referred to Buddhism, and I wondered if he had a particular view of this reading, because I know that he's translated other works in, and I'm just curious if you felt
You
that
get a very
the...
different flavor if you read, as I have read, for example, other people's translation of Quran, and they're not selections, they're the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you pick up a lot of different things that he leaves out. He's
Cleary has been selective.
Yeah.
Very
Very
selective.
selective.
It's very
He left
poetic.
out a
for
great
him.
deal about women.
Yeah.
Pardon me, Charles?
He left out a lot about women.
We left
He
out-
really believed in the equality of men and women, except in one point, and that was in inheritance. Women should not inherit quite so much as men, because men are expected to keep their families, whereas women are not.
And that's in here.
Yes,
That was in there.
That's
It's
in
in this-
Clary's
it's in
that
notes,
was in
his
actually.
notes, anyway.
And I don't think that you can blame him for that, because I think that the conditions at that time were so different.
Well,
That
there-
I think that probably it's justified that things were slanted toward
Yeah.
the men a little bit. that
But he doesn't slant things that much toward men. It happens later in Islamic history. He allows multiple marriages, but he allows it because there aren't enough men to go around to take care of all these
But the
women
condition-
because of the wars that were going on.
But the condition that he places is that,
Exactly. They have to be equal.
yes,
And there can be 4.
there can be up to 4, but
Up
they
to
have to be
4.
treated equally.
The difference that I find
There's an
between
ayat in
this,
the Quran
the
that says-
jewels, is that this takes in the political aspect of it also. So you can understand better how it became so powerful. And then when you get into, and we're going to read this,
Excuse me, Dan. Does the Quran itself take in the political aspects or the commentary on the Quran?
the Quran itself
Okay.
goes into
yeah.
the political, you will
Because
see
it speaks
the
that
reasons for
word.
things.
Yeah.
I would like to make one comment, and that was that I must have spent an inordinate amount of time on the first half of the book and left me with the second half of the book to do fairly quickly, which meant that it went, it went in and I was taking it and it was coming at me. And I can only say that the second half of this book I found psychologically extremely scary. I wasn't using I'm always so diligently intellectual and looking at the notes and getting it all exactly. But the second half, I was reading it, and I can honestly say it was scaring me. I was feeling frightened by it.
Why?
That's unfortunate.
Well,
I
because
wondered about other major religions where you have a heaven and a hell. Of course, in Christianity, the same thing, a heaven and a hell. You'll burn, as in the Muslim belief. And how about the Jewish religion? Is there a hell?
Well, Hannah, it's not a hell in the same sense. What it is, yes, there is a place where you just don't return from, and you suffer
Eternal
there.
torment?
Well, I think that's Dante. I mean, I think that, all that stuff that comes out about how you burn in hell or push a stone up the hill with your nose and it falls down or whatever it might be.
That's Greek.
Pardon?
That's Sisyphus.
That's Sisyphus. That's
and
Sisyphus.
he says you wouldn't be neither dead nor alive.
I wonder how he would feel
That's what he
about
says
the Book of
happens.
Mormon.
Not be dead and alive.
Interesting.
Here's another prophet.
Yeah, he was.
Well,
Probably-
the, actually, the thing is,
Confucius
there are,
or Buddha.
in
Buddha,
the
apparently.
entirety of the Quran, there are, there's mention of prophets. There are two prophets that are mentioned in the Quran that are not mentioned in the Bible, Hud and Saleh. And actually, one of the surahs is called Hud. And they were sent to peoples in what is now Saudi Arabia, and they were not accepted. They were completely rejected. And their stories are in here. And also, the term seal of the prophets is Surah 33, verse 40. But the term prophet there is the Arabic word anbiya, which means prophet in the sense of the prophets of the Old Testament, the section of the Old Testament called the Nevi'im, or the prophets. And there are two terms used, because and there's no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. The term used there is Rasul. Here, what it's saying is the minor prophet. That line is ending. The line of the Rasul continues. And the confusion was that it meant that both lines were ending. But the term is minor prophet. Like, there's not going to be another Isaiah, another Obadiah, or someone
Damn
like
it.
that.
That just takes away my whole future, doesn't it?
The Anbiya are done. The Rasul, I don't know what the Arabic plural is. The Rasul line is continuous.
We had better wrap this up. I think we're about at the end of our 2
Yeah.
hours. I did want to mention, as you were talking there, I'm reminded that in the Essential Quran, he talks about the prophets being kicked out, disbelieved,
Yes.
called liars, and killed. So, your prophets
Yes.
are being treated
All of-
normally
All of
for
them.
prophets.
Yes. Every single messenger of God
I think,
is not generally accepted at the time of his arrival.
very true.
Thomas Cleary has translated many classic Eastern texts, including The Essential Tao, The Essential Confucius, and The Art of War. His latest is The Essential Quran, published by Harper San Francisco, a division of HarperCollins. Visit harpercollins.com to get more information.